WU or BaptistJax.com.
North Florida TPO, proud sponsor of WJCT's First Coast Connect, bringing to the community innovation in transportation planning, commuter services, clean fuels, and intelligent transportation systems. More at northfloridatpo.com.
More than a century ago, a company called Calum helped Jacksonville become the winter film capital of the world, a reputation that lasted only a decade. Hear the fascinating true story on Bygone Jacks, Our Unsung History, a podcast from WJCT Public Media.
This is WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. Ahead in the next 5 minutes, live local news for the First Coast from the WJCT News team.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, if you've ever wondered who decides which crimes deserve reward money and how much, we're sitting down with the new executive director of First Coast Crime Stoppers. He'll take your calls and questions. Then, for 40 years, Florida Times Union photographer Bob Self helped tell the region's story and shape our collective memory. He joins us on the eve of his retirement to discuss his career and what's next. And our resident spaceman, Eddie Whisler, lands for a discussion about the creation of constellations. You can join the conversation on air by calling 904-549-2937 or email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. You can also reach out on social media. It's all ahead this hour after the day's news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Janine Herbst. Special Counsel Jack Smith filed a superseding indictment against former President Trump after the Supreme Court granted former presidents substantial immunity. This over the deadly January 6th attack at the U.S. Capitol. NPR's Carrie Johnson has more on what's in the updated indictment.
The single biggest change is that allegations about Trump misusing the Justice Department to try to promote his bogus claims of election fraud, those are now gone. And so is the Trump official who allegedly tried to carry out those efforts inside the Justice Department. That's a lawyer named Jeffrey Clark. He had been listed as co-conspirator number 4, but now all the alleged co-conspirators are people who did not work in the Trump administration at the time and people who were acting in a private capacity.
NPR's Carrie Johnson reporting. Trump posted on social media that the new charges are ridiculous. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. hit another snag in trying to get his name off this November's presidential ballots. Chuck Hornbach of member station WUWM has more.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr. says he's trying to remove his name from the presidential ballot in 10 battleground states where he says his presence would be a spoiler. He says he wants voters to back Republican Donald Trump in those states. But in the swing state of Wisconsin, Elections Commission Chairperson Ann Jacobs, a Democrat, told the panel state law is clear about candidates in good standing having to stay on the ballot.
He filed the nomination papers. He appears to qualify.
After a Republican motion to remove Kennedy failed on a tie vote, the bipartisan commission voted 5-1 to keep Kennedy on the Wisconsin ballot. For NPR News, I'm Chuck Hornbach in Milwaukee.
At least a dozen states in the U.S. have enacted restrictions or bans on cell phone use in schools, including Florida, South Carolina, Indiana, and Virginia, where education officials are applauding the rollout of new measures to restrict the use of those phones in schools. NPR's Windsor Johnston has more.
Lisa Coons is with the Virginia Department of Education. She says cell phone use, specifically to use social media, had become a major distraction.
We were hearing about the mental health challenges that our students are facing because of the challenges of social media and how much healthier and positive our students' relationships were when they weren't managing bullying and other effects of social media during the school day.
Governor Glenn Youngkin signed an executive order in July that directed the Department of Education to issue new guidelines for schools to restrict the use of cell phones. Virginia joins a number of other states that have implemented similar measures, including California, Ohio, and Indiana. Windsor Johnston, NPR News.
This is NPR News.
On WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. The Jacksonville Transportation Authority has entered into its next phase of testing its ultimate urban circulator autonomous transit system by letting passengers ride one of the Transportation Authority's autonomous vehicles in the Brooklyn community. The Brooklyn AV Circulator will run from the Jacksonville Regional Transportation Center in La Villa to 8 existing and new JTA stops along Riverside Avenue. Passengers can catch a free ride to 14 different lunch spots. The test phase runs through October 25th from 11 until 2, JTA says. The University of North Florida is proposing changes to on-campus protests. These proposals come after 16 people were arrested in May after they rallied against the Israel-Hamas war. The proposed changes would outlaw encampments without prior approval and limit the size and material of a sign. Grace Ward, a student at the university, told our news partner News4Jax what she thinks of the proposed changes.
I don't mind if you have a cause, go ahead, protest your cause, but on campus, it's kind of annoying because if they're setting up all their stuff, it's it kind of gets in the way of our college life.
The university's Board of Trustees will consider the changes at its September 30th meeting. High temperatures this afternoon up to 90 degrees and a chance of thunderstorms between noon and 3. Upper 70s tonight and back up to 91 degrees for Thursday afternoon.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Workday. With AI at the core of its system, Workday is committed to delivering continuous innovation to prepare organizations for what's next. Workday, an enterprise platform for finance and HR rock stars.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, his work chronicled key moments in First Coast history for the past 40 years. In just a bit, we talk to Florida Times Union photographer Bob Self about his pending retirement and memories of the only full-time job that he's ever held. But first, they've helped solve 132 murders since 2002 and paid tens of thousands in rewards to anonymous tipsters. But it's a time of change for First Coast Crime Stoppers, which is getting only its second executive director in its 22-year history. And he joins me now. Chase Robinson, welcome to First Coast Connect.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me this morning.
Thank you for being here. So Wyllie Hodges was the original executive director of First Coast Crime Stoppers, and he remained so until his retirement, well, rather until he died last year. So what does it mean to you to fill his shoes?
So first off, it's an honor to fill his shoes, but also I think it's a chance to carry on his legacy. I was able to work with him for about 2 years and learn what he really wanted Crime Stoppers to be and what he thought Crime Stoppers was capable of. So I'm really excited to put my own spin on it, but also take his, professional expertise and also his moral values along with it into the future.
So I used to work in TV news.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned to you, I felt like we were running Crime Stoppers name and number multiple times every week. But for those who don't know what Crime Stoppers is and what its mission is, explain.
So we're a nonprofit organization, and we offer a crime-solving and crime prevention programming method. So we offer a way for citizens of the First Coast, specifically in the 6 counties that we cover. It's Nassau, Duval, Clay, Baker, Bradford, and Union counties. So anyone residing in these 6 counties can contact Crime Stoppers regarding anything involving any criminal activity. And when they report that information to us, they remain completely anonymous throughout the entire process. And that's something that we take very seriously and something that we've never compromised in over the 20 years we've been in Jacksonville and the First Coast. So if you know anything about a crime, whether it's something small or something big, if you report that information to Crime Stoppers, you may be eligible to a $3,000 cash reward, up to a $3,000 cash reward. And if that leads to the arrest of someone, you get paid that cash reward. And even picking up that reward is anonymous as well. The whole process, I want to make more transparent, make people aware that they truly are anonymous. And, that anonymity has a meaning behind it. It's not just a long word with a bunch of vowels. That people need to understand what that means and why we take so much pride in protecting it.
So you talk about if somebody sees a crime or knows about a crime that happened, they can call Crime Stoppers. But how do you interface with JSO or another law enforcement agency? At what point are people calling you? What point should they be calling 911?
So if they're first off, if they're witnessing anything happening, live at the moment, they should immediately call 911. That's what we always tell our tipsters that call in that may be seeing a crime happen as they're calling us. Our tips coordinator, she is a wealth of resources for tipsters calling in. But first off, if you're seeing something happen, call 911. But immediately after you contact 911 and get police or EMS dispatched, pick up the phone and call First Coast Crime Stoppers. You can then report that information to us so that if the information that you're saying leads to an arrest and the crime or criminal activity that you're witnessing, you can get paid a cash reward up to $3,000 for that information. But it is important if you are witnessing something to call 911 first.
So who makes the decision about whether a crime merits an award or how much that crime reward should be?
So we have a board of directors, a 19-member board of directors, and they determine the types of crimes that we pay rewards for and also the quantity of the reward that is to be paid out. So the more severe the board determines a crime to be, the higher the reward amount will be. So it can range anywhere from $100 to $200 up to $3,000, or if it's an enhanced reward case, upwards of $10,000 to $15,000.
And so that's a decision that the board makes. Is that made with input from the state attorney's office, from JSO?
So the biggest input would be the Florida Association of Crime Stoppers. So that's a statewide organization that every Crime Stoppers organization in the state of Florida is a member of. And we have 3 conferences throughout the year. And one of the major points of that is determining the severity of crimes and then what level of reward will be paid out for said crimes.
So we are talking to the new executive director of Crime Stoppers, and you are welcome to call with questions or comments. His name is Chase Robinson, and you can reach us on air at 904-549-2937. You can also email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org or reach out on social media. So what kind of accountability is there in terms of the money and the confidential tipsters? You mentioned earlier that anonymity is more than just a big word with a lot of vowels. So how can you affirm to somebody that their identity is going to be protected if they call or if they come to collect an award?
So first off, from the very beginning, you decide that information that you have, you think can lead to the arrest of someone involved in a criminal case, whether you call our toll-free hotline at 1-866-845-TIPS that you see broadcast all over the news and websites and out there in the media. If you go to our website at fccrimestoppers.com, use our mobile app, P3 Tips, or even call our statewide line at ** Tips. Regardless of which method you use, they each have their own unique way of protecting your anonymity. So, for example, the ** Tips, that is a phone line that you can pick up your mobile phone and call ** Tips, and it automatically redirects you to the correct Crime Stoppers agency based off of your cell phone location. And first off, people are going to be like, oh, well, they're tracking me or they're going to know where I am. Well, we actually have partnerships with the major phone companies that instead of being able to track your exact location, they actually only ping the county that you're calling from. So even the location is protected from phone information. If you're calling our hotline, which actually the call center is based in an undisclosed location in Southeast Texas, you're actually protected there. They're trained to not take your personal information. The caller ID is blocked, and the system that they use, our tips coordinator here, is how she coordinates that information to the local law enforcement agencies. She even performs what we call a sanitization method, where any form of indirect identification. So say if someone is submitting tip information about their neighbor, and they might put that my neighbor's doing, XYZ, that's an indirect form of identification. So she would put an individual and replace, my neighbor, so people don't accidentally identify themselves. So we take multiple levels of security to ensure that individuals remain anonymous.
And so if somebody makes a tip and they believe that crime has been solved because of their tip, how do they follow up? Are they notified, hey, you've got this reward waiting for you, or is that on them to find out themselves?
So that's on them. And the reason why is because we don't collect your phone number. We don't collect any personal information. So we have no way to contact you. So the way that we ask tipsters, if they've submitted information to Crime Stoppers, is to call using our phone number that you're given when you submit your tip information, or go on our website or tip app, and you can message our tips coordinator directly on Tuesdays or Thursdays and you can say, hey, here is my tip number. Just wanted to check to see if it's led to the arrest of someone. If so, am I eligible for a cash reward? So that's a way that tipsters have to reach back out to us in order to find out the status of their tips. And with that, I mean, last year alone, we set a record paying out $40,000 in rewards just alone. That was an organizational record. And that's only at a 49% pickup rate, too.
Yeah, so talk about that. I'd seen that reported previously. So there's a huge proportion of people that are eligible for these rewards that don't collect it. What do you think is happening there? And is it a priority for you to make that pickup rate better?
So, I mean, that's one of the reasons why I want to create this sense of transparency with Crime Stoppers so people understand how the program works. And for example, just alone this year, the roughly $40,000 that's just, sitting out there that's been approved. The information has led to the arrest of an individual. It's just waiting for someone to pick it up. I want people to understand, well, how can they get access to their cash reward? What does the pickup process look like? I want there to be a sense of transparency and also a reassurance that their anonymity is secured, even picking up the cash reward at the bank, which, I mean, it's kind of a double-edged sword there. We're not sure if, people are just calling in information to do the right thing because they care about their community, or if maybe they're scared to pick up the reward. But we just want to reassure individuals that even when you go to the bank to pick up your cash reward, that's secure as well. We partner with Truist, and there's multiple locations around the First Coast. So if you've been approved for a reward and you call our office, you message our office, you're going to get a unique reward pickup ID. You take that to the bank and you actually go through the drive-through tube. And we have partners here at Truist that are actually trained in Crime Stoppers reward payouts. So you go to the drive-through, you can either walk or drive through. You place your reward pickup ID on a little sticky note or piece of paper. You put it in the tube. It goes back to the bank teller because they're trained in Crime Stoppers reward payouts. They then put their approved cash amount in an envelope, send it back down the tube. You're on your way. There's no face-to-face interaction.
They don't require an ID.
No ID, no name, no phone number, nothing. So from the moment you submit a tip until that very end, you're guaranteed anonymity.
So what happens to the unclaimed money? Does it sit there forever? Does it get reinvested?
So if you're approved for a reward, it sits in a rewards payable account for about 30 days. And once that 30 days is up, it goes into what we call a 90-day pickup window. So that 90-day pickup window will allow a tipster to call in and say, hey, I forgot that my reward to pick up my reward, so I want to, arrange a date and time for me to go by the bank and pick it up. So if it's within that 90 days, it just goes back before our board of directors, they reapprove it, and our tips coordinator can give them the correct information to go to the bank. After that 90 days, it goes back into a pot, and once again, all we have to do is wait for the tipster to reach back out to us. But it's not like if you forget to pick up a reward that was from 3 years ago that money's just gone. It's still in an account waiting for you to just contact Crime Stoppers.
So I guess because I'm thinking some of these crimes must take years to solve or to resolve. At what point does the money become available? Is that just after an arrest or after an adjudication, like if somebody's actually convicted?
So that's a very good point. So our organization is unique in the fact that we pay our rewards upon arrest, not conviction. So if someone is arrested, a suspect in a case, and that suspect was arrested because of the information that you provided, you are now eligible for that cash reward and would then go through the payout process for said cash reward.
And so how many of the cases that you handle are cases that exist already as reported crimes and these tips are helping to solve or at least contributing information? And how many of the calls that you receive are initiating an investigation or initiating a complaint of some kind?
So the largest portion of our tips are going to be related to ongoing, criminal investigations. That's what JSO puts out information on, all of our other law enforcement partners. Typically, cases that they're working on right now, people are submitting information on just because it's made publicly aware or just that's what they're most familiar with. But there's also important cases like cold case homicides. A lot of times we partner with Cold Case Project, and we can get a lot of tips on cold case homicides that, may have gone years without being solved. But, one random piece of information that someone just finally decided to submit to Crime Stoppers can help solve that case. So it's a mix of everything, but overall it's mostly ongoing cases, and usually it's cases that maybe detectives might not have any more information to go on, and it's that one Crime Stopper tip that just points them in the right direction that leads them to the arrest of a suspect.
If you're just joining us, I'm talking to Chase Robinson. He is the new executive director of First Coast Crime Stoppers. Chase, is there any case in particular that has been like the biggest response that you've ever received, or a case that just kind of blew up your phone lines with responses for people offering tips?
So I would say there's two cases in the past year that would really ring a bell for that or really highlight the importance of Crime Stoppers. There was a case, I believe it was last year. It was a Derek Pitts case. He was a 16-year-old who was shot and killed at the Cooper's Hawk Apartments on Old St. Augustine Road, and JSO detectives were kind of at a standstill in terms of investigational leads. And immediately, once we put up an enhanced reward for $10,000, going from our $3,000 standard reward to that $10,000, we received 15 tips immediately that day. And JSO really came out and said that, hey, we wouldn't have been able to solve this case without the help of Crime Stoppers. So I think it's really important that people just, any information you have, contact Crime Stoppers, because that small amount of information can just point detectives in the right way. And in this case, it was a 16-year-old who was murdered, and we were able to solve the case and bring justice to the family.
So, how motivating is money when it comes to people? I mean, it sounds like that threshold, increasing that amount of money, was a big trigger for people to decide to actually step in and offer information.
And that is something that we see a good trend on, over the years is typically once a reward is enhanced from our 3,000, it could be up to 8,000, 10,000, whatever it might be. We do see an influx of tips. So there are people that are waiting, to see if a case will be enhanced to submit their information. But also when we do receive enhanced rewards, we do really incentivize people to not just want to put a bunch of money up for it, in the beginning, that we want people to do the right thing, not for money. I mean, the money will be there if they receive, information that leads to an arrest. But I do see a trend in that people are, sometimes waiting back on that enhanced reward to submit their information.
And is there a threshold? I feel like there's some cases where other agencies have maybe chipped in. I know during the Jared Bridegan case that ATF kind of created its own reward fund. Is that something that you match and mirror? Is that something that always goes through Crime Stoppers, or is the reward sometimes available outside of your agency?
So sometimes there are rewards available outside, but most of the time we're able to work with a lot of local agencies to have the funds go through Crime Stoppers. And the reason why is because if we can make one large pot and make a reward, tens of thousands of dollars, it can, like we mentioned earlier, incentivize people to submit information. So we partner with a lot of different local agencies, JSO, Florida Sheriff's Office, multiple different outlets, to enhance rewards, the Florida Sheriff's Association as well. So most of the time it does go through Crime Stoppers, but there are ways for rewards to be paid outside of Crime Stoppers.
And is there a max?
No, there's no max. Essentially, it could be as high as organizations or families are willing to put up for the case.
We've got a call from AJ with Mad Dads. Good morning, AJ. Go ahead.
Good morning, Ann. To your guest, I just want to know what Crime Stoppers going to do to engage the community more? Are y'all going to get out more than what y'all used to do, and maybe do some community events to get the people re-engaged with Crime Stoppers? A lot of people, especially a lot of people that Mad Dads deal with, don't really know y'all too much except seeing y'all on TV with the police most of the time. Are y'all going to get out and meet, knock on doors, meet people so they can build a trust relationship with y'all?
Good question, AJ. Thank you.
Yeah, most definitely. That's something that I really want to highlight on going forward is putting a face to Crime Stoppers. And like I mentioned earlier, having that sense of transparency and getting out and physically doing community events, walking door to door if that's necessary. I think Crime Stoppers needs to, go back to his roots of a community organization and, of course, keep on pumping out our information on social media, news outlets. But I do agree, yes, we need to get out in the community more and really put faces to our organization and create a sense of trust in First Coast Crime Stoppers.
And what about just advocacy for, reporting crime? We've all talked about and heard much about community resistance, very often for safety reasons, or a distrust of law enforcement, that the desire to or the willingness to speak out when something is, a criminal act is committed, or they know something is limited. How can an agency like Crime Stoppers affect that reality?
I think by hitting on the importance of anonymity and then the different levels that we take to protect that. I think that fear of retaliation is real, and that individuals can be scared about, giving information on, I mean, it could be a family member, a close friend, it could be members of their own community. And I think if there's a way or an outlet for people to get that information to a non law enforcement agency like First Coast Crime Stoppers, that can guarantee their protection and that their identity is never released to the public, the community, I think that is a way to incentivize people to kind of take the safety of their communities into their own hands, essentially, and make their neighborhoods safer again.
Is it frustrating sometimes for law enforcement dealing with Crime Stoppers insofar as you may have somebody offering a tip? They may be the only person that can connect that crime to that perpetrator, and yet you don't have the information to give JSO so that they could follow up on that lead.
I mean, of course, it can be frustrating, especially if there's only one person that knows information, but we can't force people to provide information. But once again, I think it goes back to even what the caller was mentioning on going out in the community and creating that sense of trust in Crime Stoppers. So when that event does happen, individuals will feel capable that they can tell someone, and that Crime Stoppers is that someone that they can tell and that they can feel comfortable doing that. So we can create that sense of community, that sense of trust in one another, because we all have the same goal here. We all want to have a safe community. We all want to work together. So I think if we can all understand that and really take pride in Jacksonville and the First Coast, that's one way that we can do that.
I think people sometimes don't realize how much police require or rely on an account from somebody who can help them put the pieces together, as opposed to just trying to assemble the jigsaw themselves without assistance. So we're on a steep decline for homicides this year in 2023. They're down 40% so far over last year, but still we're on track to have 88 homicides if we stay on that trajectory in 2024. So far, arrests have been made in just 14 of those 88 cases. How many of those do you think could actually be solved or resolved with an arrest if people were speaking out or offering what they know?
So roughly out of per year, the number of homicides that are solved in the First Coast area, about 15% of them come from Crime Stopper tips. So Crime Stopper tips do help with the solving of murder cases. Of course, we want more murder cases to be solved, but I think it comes back to that root case of if we can have a community that can trust in one another, has an organization that they can put their faith in, that we can have that information be brought forward to solve even more cases going forward. Because, I mean, it's wonderful that murder cases are coming down. I mean, that's what we all want, right? We all want a safer community, but they're still happening. There's still cases out there. There's still grieving families, and we can't just neglect those families because the rate's coming down overall. We have to still be that advocate and allow people to submit information if they have it and to feel comfortable doing it.
So tell me a little bit about this move towards trying to make tips easier to submit via social media or a mobile phone. One thing that I thought was really interesting was you can take screen grabs of, maybe something you're seeing on Instagram or a conversation that's happening in real time on a Facebook Live, and those can be submitted as part of someone's tip through this platform.
Correct, and that's something that our website and our mobile app P3 Tips allows you to do. You can take screenshots of social media handles, anything you're seeing, like you mentioned, on Facebook Live, TikTok, Twitter, anything, because nowadays people post anything on those outlets. So I think having that method of tip submission really allows us to appeal to a new generation of tipsters, and I think that's really vital to keep our program's success, trending upward going forward. And I mean, anything that can support a tips information, like I mentioned, it could be screenshots, it could be audio recordings. The littlest information can lead to the arrest of someone involved in the case. You can put it on that tip. And one unique thing with our mobile app and our website is you can continually add to your tip. You can add information to it. So it's not like once you submit your tip, it's finalized. There's nothing else you can do. So if you're continually going on social media, texting someone, you hear something, you can always put that information back into your tip and update it. And all that updated information will be vetted through our tips coordinator and will be sent to law enforcement. So it could even be that tip update that leads to the arrest rather than the information you originally provided.
I was looking a little bit at your, IRS filings for the agency. You've got a pretty good sized budget, not a ton of overhead. I mean, you've got about $500,000 a year and, not much in the way of salaries, but a lot of money going towards advertising. Is that the chief expense? Do you think the wisest use of money? Is there any discussion about changing that formula going forward?
So I would say the largest portion of our budget needs to go to advertising. Now, in the past, that has been in the form of static billboards, mobile billboards, bus transit shelters, advertising on the JTA buses themselves, and all those are very important. But I think it just needs to have a revamp or revitalization. I think kind of what I was alluding to earlier was taking that advertising and pushing it towards the new generation of tipsters, and also allowing it to reach every citizen of every corner of the First Coast. And I mean, I know it was the 2020 U.S. Census. I think it's 90% of First Coast residents have access to a smart device, and roughly 90% have access to broadband internet. So if we have ways to reach everyone, I mean, we can kind of break down socioeconomic barriers and really reach everyone, which is something that I want to do, and I think is vital because, we're an organization for all, and we really want to appeal that and break down those barriers and create that sense of transparency.
And we should be clear, that money is not like tax money. It comes from a fund that's created through the criminal justice system and then also through some law enforcement agencies that kind of fundraise and donate. Is that right?
So our largest source of funding it's called the Crime Stopper Trust Fund, and that was set up, I believe, in the early 2000s. And the money that is funded in that trust fund actually comes from court fines that are assessed to criminals. So in their, the laundry list of court fines that they receive, one of those is a $20 Crime Stopper fine. And that $20 goes into a state fund, and then at the end of the year, that is then distributed to every Crime Stopper agency in Florida. And depending on the size of the program, different organizations get different levels of money, but that is what we use to pay out our rewards. So essentially, it's people getting arrested for crimes that are actually funding the arrest of new criminals. So all that money is actually being put to good use, and it's not taxpayer dollars that we're using.
Well, Chase Robinson, it is very nice to meet you in person, and I look forward to staying abreast of your work at Crime Stoppers. But thanks for coming by today.
Yeah, very nice meeting you, and I'm glad to be on. Thank you.
Up next, 40 years of telling Jacksonville's story. We talk to the Times Union's senior staff photographer, Bob Self, on the eve of his retirement. Welcome back. Next Friday is Florida Times Union's senior staff photographer Bob Self's last day. Unbelievably, he's retiring after 40 years from the only full-time job he's ever had. And he joins me now. Hey, Bob, welcome.
Good morning. Happy to be here.
Happy to have you. So, Bob, you hear people say all the time you had one job, but literally you had one job. This is the one full-time job that you've had in your life. It's unusual, I would say.
Yeah, I guess so in retrospect. I went off, I had a lot of part-time jobs and little things like that. Went off to college. Somehow found my way into photojournalism kind of through the back door. Started working for whoever would have me, as a stringer, freelancer, whatnot.
Initially, you were planning on being a veterinarian?
Yeah, I was always a science nerd,
Uh-huh.
From middle school on. And went off to college thinking I was going to become a veterinarian. And then after struggling through the core biology sequence at University of Florida with 750 other pre-science majors and then bombing the core chemistry, I figured, well, maybe vet school isn't in my future, but I'm still going to go into the sciences.
Yeah.
But somehow about 3 years into my career, I ended up finding photography and photojournalism.
How did you come across photojournalism?
I started doing some work for a yearbook they were trying to start at Florida. And so they was going out and photographing assignments for that. It was like, this is kind of fun. And then I got work for the public affairs department at the university as a lab tech. They had me processing film and making prints, and they started sending me out on assignments. And
back in the day, we just stopped.
Yes, I am totally a product of the analog era. And, and then I took the beginning photography class at the photojournalism program, which I had to petition to get in because I wasn't in the journalism school. And then I took the beginning photography class at the fine art program. And I took them the same time. And that kind of set the tone for how I looked at visuals and photography and how I approach photojournalism from that point forward.
Explain a little bit about the difference between fine art photography and photojournalism. Not everybody knows.
Fine art photography is kind of do whatever you want to do. Have a vision. It doesn't have to have a direct application, a direct purpose. It can be very creative. And when I was at Florida, Jerry Yulesman was kind of the god there doing his multiple printing stuff and just these surreal images he was creating well before the days of Photoshop. And, but photojournalism, you're photographing for an audience. You are capturing information. You are trying to tell a story with a photo that goes to an audience that wants to learn or you want to educate about a particular subject matter.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always been fascinated by the photographers that kind of straddle the line between the two, where a photojournalist will look at the image and say, oh, that's fine art stuff. And a fine artist will look at it and go, no, that's photojournalism. And I've always been fascinated by that area. So every now and then I can kind of sneak something in when I'm doing work for the paper that kind of fits in that genre.
For people who are watching this live stream, either on Facebook or YouTube, we're going to be able to show some of your photos that we've selected and some that you've selected that sort of capture a bit of this enormous career that you've had. And one that I want to start with, because it does have elements of both fine art in terms of its structure and its sort of visual beauty, and then just also the enormity of the news subject that you're covering. It's Homestead after the hurricane.
Yeah.
And you were down there documenting it, and it's an astonishing photo that just kind of captures the wreckage this family is enduring.
Is that in their living room?
In their living room, yeah. Tell us what we see in that picture.
Well, I'd ridden out Hurricane Andrew in the Miami Herald building, which was built like a bunker. And then at first light the next morning, I'm out and just started going to see what I could see in the aftermath. And we started in downtown and worked our way south. And the further south that I got, the more the damage was. And by the time you got down in the Homestead area, it looked like the path of a tornado, but it was as far as you could see in all directions. And you just start weaving around and going down streets and getting out and walking and exploring, and seeing what you can see. And that was just one of the things I stumbled into, was this family where literally half their house had been ripped away. And they're just still sitting in the aftermath, very much in shock still. And, I just document what I see.
Yeah, I mean, there's a mother holding a child, a woman just kind of with her hand over her mouth in shock. And so how do you interact with people as a photographer when you're capturing these moments that are so awful?
I have always tried to deal with people with a very light touch. What I do is inherently invasive on other people's lives, but I have never taken the approach that anybody owed me anything. And I'm very respectful of that. And so I walk in, I may start taking some pictures, but I talk to them and I get a sense for their comfort level with me being there, and just try to make them feel like, I care about what's going on, and because I do. But I also have a story I want to tell, and I want to be able to share their story and make people realize the effects of what they are living through and what they are dealing with. I mean, it's one thing to read about it, but it's another thing to have it staring you in the face.
There's another photo that we have, and it's of a very different kind of news event, but one that was really important here in Jacksonville at what is now Springfield Park, formerly Confederate Park. But there is a statue that has since been removed.
Yes.
That was vandalized. And it actually wasn't long that statue was visible like that, because the city rather quickly covered it up and cleaned it up. But it's almost like it has blood spattered on it. And you have a photograph of a gentleman standing and looking at it. Describe what that photo was and how you captured that.
That morning, we had gotten word that they had vandalized the Confederate monument in downtown Jacksonville and then Hemming Park had been vandalized with paint. And I had been following the progression of all of the protests and the discussions regarding Confederate monuments. and was pretty aware of most of what was around town. In fact, I had a list of things that, I had photographed at one point. And I was like, let me just go check out some of the other locations and see if anything had happened in any of those. And so I went over to the park, and the Women of the Confederacy Monument had been vandalized with red paint. And there were members of the Sons of the Confederacy that were there and just kind of, looking at it and trying to figure out, okay, what do we do here? And
we should say the guy who's looking at it, his back is to you, but he's wearing a Sons of Confederate Veterans, stars and bars, kind of army jacket that says Kirby Smith, Florida. On the back.
And so, for me, it was a subtle but a powerful image that kind of encapsulated a lot of what was going on. I mean, I've talked with a lot of the folks that are defenders of the Confederacy or defenders of the history, however you want to put it. Some are dug in. Some, I think, have very genuine, heartfelt feelings about the history of it. I'm one to try and kind of see the various sides of things, because I'm not a real binary, it's either left or right, yes or no. The world's more complicated than that. And that's what I try to capture a little bit of in my imagery.
I mean, you're more of a color photographer than black and white, right? Is there kind of not necessarily trying to position your photography as a conclusionary statement, but more of just a way to look at an issue?
The world is not a simple place, and people want simple answers. Visually, I can distill things down, but I can't answer questions.
That's interesting. I want to take a look at another photo that you took, because one of the trademarks for me of Bob's self-photography is just a sense of whimsy, even in a serious situation. And so this is a photograph that you took after a fire that is of a firefighter. He's actually still hosing down the fire. And describe what's on the television screen next to him and kind of how that photo came together.
Yeah, that's a fairly early one of mine. And to your point, I've always taken my work seriously. I've never taken myself terribly seriously. But I'm always kind of looking for the quirky and the offbeat. And this was like a motel fire, I think maybe on Phillips Highway. I can't even remember anymore. And this was back in a different era where, you could get access to things, and they didn't lock things down, and they didn't put up police lines a block away from what was happening. And so they were working on this fire, and things were getting calmed down a little bit. And I just kind of got a little closer, and it was in a hotel room. And I shot some pictures, and then I was like, let me step inside. And when I stepped inside, I noticed the TV sitting on the stand was still turned on, and Gunsmoke was on. And it was just this weird, surreal thing that, in this gutted out hotel room, and the guy standing there, and then like the opening credits or something came up with the guy bringing the gun up, and it like paralleled the framing and the positioning of the firefighter and the hose. And it's just like, this is so weird. But it's so good.
It's just such an interesting moment. And you titled it like Gunsmoke and
I think that was something that came to me late last night, like Fire and Gunsmoke or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a really interesting image. I want to ask you, you talked about access, and obviously that's one big thing that's changed in journalism, whether it's a crime scene or kind of anywhere. But there's been huge digital changes, huge technological changes, especially for photography. Talk a little bit about how you had to adapt to that changing landscape.
Yeah, I mean, when I went to school, everything I learned was analog. So I was shooting film, I was making prints, working in the darkroom, all that good stuff, and that was what I did for years. We'd go take a picture, process it, put it in the darkroom, sit down at a typewriter at work and type out a caption, scotch tape it to the print, and hand it off to the next person in line. And every step of the process had a person involved in making their part of the thing till the printed paper came out. And with the evolution of digital processes, things slowly changed, and you simply adapt. I mean, everything about my job is problem solving. You figure out how to make things happen. You plan for things. You anticipate things. And the same is true with the technology. As the technology changed, we adapted to incorporate the parts of it that helped us do our job quicker, better, whatever. And, initially it was like we started shooting color negative film, and then we could scan it, when the early scanners came
Yeah.
up. So we could choose black and white and color instead of having to make black and white prints or color prints and it just kept evolving. The first digital cameras, they were horrible, but, you could get a photo back to the office very, very quickly compared to processing film and making prints or scanning prints. So, every step of the technology changed. In the earliest regular use digital cameras we had, the quality was, it was okay. Film still looked better, but eventually the equation flipped.
I would imagine that also changes the pace of your job, though, right? If everything can be done immediately, then let's get it now. Less time to perhaps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't make our job easier. It just changes the dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
In the early days, we'd go on the road with a mobile darkroom, and we'd turn our hotel room into a portable darkroom.
Wow.
And chemicals and enlargers and the whole 9 yards. It would take a couple hours to, hand process your film in a hotel room, and you put sheet plastic up over all the windows and such, and you basically put a do not disturb sign on the door, and you'd go on your hands and knees processing film by hand in the bathroom, and then you'd dry it with a hairdryer, and then you'd sit down with an enlarger and you'd make a print, and it was crazy. And if you did something like that today, they'd think you had a meth lab in the room. So yeah, but they wouldn't expect but maybe one color photo and a couple of black and white photos from a whole football game. And now it's like, how fast can we have them? And we want 30, 40, 60 images from a game, within a couple hours of the game being over. So, that's just a different level of stress.
We have got a call from a friend of ours, also a very well-known First Coast photographer, Walter Coker. Welcome to First Coast Connect.
The legend.
Legend.
Hey, Bob. Hey, Ann.
Hey, how's it going, Walter?
Great. Hey, I just want to comment on Bob. Congratulations, Bob. Amazing career. I've admired your work for decades, really. Oddly enough, we started in the same office at Public Affairs over at the University of Florida.
Yeah.
Back in the 80s, under Herb Press. I think you might remember him.
Absolutely.
But, yeah, like I said, I've admired your work forever. Always done with your own eye and a very professional approach. And the city ought to dedicate a museum to you for what you've done.
That's okay. Thank you, Walter. It's very kind of you. I was just doing my job, but I was always learning, and it's been fun. I mean, no 2 days have ever been the same, and I've never lost my love for being on the street and dealing with the public. The business is not as much fun. It has changed significantly, and I'm not going to miss that part of it. But I will miss being on the street, but I'm not going away. I'm going to be around.
I just want to note a couple of comments. I had reached out to some of your colleagues, and we also got a note from your former colleague, Dan, but Mary Kelly Palco, when I was talking, she's your former editor, also a legend, just saying that one of her favorite things of all of your extraordinary work was your portraiture. And I think that is something that is an exceptional talent of yours, is really capturing the spirit of somebody in a very thoughtful way. One that she really particularly liked was your photo of Jake Godbold. But Dan Scanlon also said he worked with you for 34 years. He came to appreciate early on how focused and caring a photographer you are, and always, and that he's looking forward to what you'll do in the future. So what will you be doing in the future?
Well, first step is I'm reviving something from my past. In the summers of 88, 89, and 90, I spent the summers at American Beach, the historically black beach up on Amelia Island, and documented the social scene at the time. I didn't know anything about it. I'd only been in town a few years. I kept hearing stories about it, and I'd inquire, and I tended to get this dismissive response of, well, isn't that the Black Beach? And I'm kind of like, yeah, that's kind of the whole point. I didn't know something like that still existed. And so in the summer of 88, I went up there with a couple of Leica rangefinders and a pocket full of Tri-X and just waded into the crowds. and just started taking pictures and learning about it, and just kind of instantly fell in love with the place.
And that project is going to come to kind of a fruition.
I am working in the early phases with the University of Georgia Press to do a book of that work, and I'm really excited about that.
Well, Bob, all your work is so great. Thank you for being here. Thank you for all the work you've done for this city over the past 40 years. Really appreciate it.
I'm thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled to have been a part of the long lineage of very great photographers that have worked in this town, and there'll be more after me.
That's Bob Self. Up next, our resident starman Eddie Whisler stops by to catch us up on how the chance alignments of the stars have become some of our most recognized constellations.
It's storm season, and JEA is prepared, with more than 2,000 employees ready to respond should extreme weather hit our area. And they'll work 24/7 to get our area restored. More info at jea.com/storm.
North Florida TPO, proud sponsor of WJCT's First Coast Connect, bringing to the community innovation in transportation planning, commuter services, clean fuels, and intelligent transportation systems. More at northfloridatpo.com.
I'm Meghna Chakrabarty. In the next episode of our special series, Elements of Energy, cobalt, and a new kind of slavery in Congo used to mine it.
Mining has taken over that entire part of the Congo, and there's just no other way for people to survive.
The human cost of cobalt mining. That's episode 3 of our week-long exploration, Elements of Energy, coming up on the next On Point.
Today at 11, here on WJCT News 89.9.
I'm Scott Tong. Ever seen a base jumper soar off a cliff? The new National Geographic documentary Fly is a nervous look at the beauty and danger of their jumps.
It feels like freedom. It's that moment that you're actually flying like a bird. It's a feeling that you can only feel when you actually fly it.
Next time, here and now.
Today at 2 on WJCT News 89.9.
Joe Biden's stance on the war in Gaza cost him hundreds of thousands of votes in the presidential primaries. With the new nominee, the uncommitted say they're unconvinced.
You are bombing our families with our money, and just one good speech is going to win us over again? I don't think so.
As the campaign moves into top gear, can Kamala Harris win back this key constituency? That's next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Is our resident space expert, Eddie Whisler. He's back. He's the planetarium director at the Museum of Science and History, and we love having him every month. Welcome. How's it going?
It's so much fun to be here every
It's
month.
great to have you.
Yeah.
We just learned a new word.
We did, like just as I entered the studio and we got talking right away.
Pareidolia.
Yeah, pareidolia.
So this is the practice of finding some sort of sense in random things, like you
Find
see
a face in grilled cheese sandwiches.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or in toast.
Yeah, exactly.
How does that take us into the outer realms?
Because it's pattern seeking. We are the pattern seeking creatures to have none above us on this planet. And so we look up into the nighttime sky and we're just gonna do that.
Yeah.
And not only that, but the stars they remain over the length of civilizations. And so, in the planetarium, we get people all the time who are asking, why is it that the stars are in the locations that they're at? There's Orion, there's Scorpius, there's kings and queens and villains and heroes and musical instruments.
And animals.
But it's worth noting that every civilization and every ancestor, tribe, everywhere on the planet had very different things to say about all of the patterns in the sky, right? They connected them completely different ways. But they remain for long periods of time. You could take somebody from thousands of years ago, bring them to today, and they'll look up and they'll recognize the sky. It's the one thing that had remained.
Because the sky is the same as it was over those many, many years.
Yes. But if you go back tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, now the stars have shifted in the sky. What our ancient ancestors thought was permanent changes. And the reason why that is really fun. But to finish up with what it was that we were just talking about, the stars are in their locations temporarily, and they are not in a special place necessarily, even though some of them, like Orion, looks really good, you know? But Lynx it doesn't really look like what it's supposed to be, you know? So some of the stuff really pops out and some of the stuff doesn't. But it's because we're seeing the stars in some temporary arrangement. It's as random as when you drive down the street and raindrops in a rainstorm land on your windshield in a particular pattern.
Just completely random.
It's just there. We are in a storm of stars. This is why we see our neighborhood stars. We see the points of light in the nighttime sky because, like a raindrop is in a hurricane, and sometimes there are nearby raindrops that you could see as your neighbors. We're in a storm of stars called the Milky Way galaxy, and we look up and out. That's the important part. We don't look up. One thing that we raise our consciousness of our guests who come into the planetarium, everybody wants to look up at the nighttime sky, but you'll look at it differently if you start thinking about looking out into our neighborhood in the universe. Now, all of a sudden, you're doing a very different thing.
Explain how. Why is that different?
Because looking up makes you think that you're there's a canopy, there's a dome. You're looking up at it.
And you're the center.
And that you're the center looking up at a thing, but you're not. You're looking, a clear nighttime sky is a windshield, and you're looking out into our neighborhood. And so just like a raindrop could arise to consciousness and look out at other raindrops in its nearby area, and it would say, oh, that raindrop is over there, and oh, that raindrop is over there. We're in a storm of stars called a galaxy, and we're looking out at all of our neighborhood stars that are fellow travelers. And everybody, just like raindrops in a hurricane, would be moving because the wind is buffeting them around. Well, gravity is pulling all of our neighbors in different directions, and they're fellow travelers, but they have their own trajectories. They're all moving through the galaxy in different ways. And you run that sky and fast forward 1 million years, and you would watch as these different stars are moving in different directions, some towards us, some away, some up, some down, some to the left, to the right. And so we are looking up at a nighttime sky, moving 230 miles per second around a galaxy, and that seems fast, but that speed is just a meager speed in the turning of the galaxy, and over just a measly couple thousand years, not much changes.
So some of it is perspective, figuring out how to look at things and not just what you're looking at.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Perspective, because we are attached to this planet, looking out into the nighttime sky, and nothing really changes over that short amount of time.
So you have, as always, part of a series that's coming up. This one is on black holes, which are endlessly fascinating.
Oh, so much fun. September 18th, audience is 55 and older only. It's a series called the Silver Space Series.
And that is 9 a.m. to 12:30 on September 18th.
Yeah.
Eddie Whisler, we love having you here. Thank you so much for coming on today.
It's so much fun, always.
All right. That's our program. We welcome your...
For First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or BaptistJax.com. Amelia Island presents the Amelia Island Dance Festival September 5th to 8th, with events celebrating an extensive selection of dance genres, plus workshops designed to inspire dancers of all levels. More information at ameliaisland.com/dance.
20 minutes of reading a day paves the way to success. Visit the library together. Let your child choose books that excite them. A world of adventure awaits on every shelf. For more information, readjax.org.